Pull open the door. Feel the handle. Cold chrome, smooth. The kind that catches the light and holds it.
Come on in, hun.
The bell above the door gives a small ring as you step in out of the night air, and then it hits you all at once. Warmth, light, the smell of coffee and griddle grease, and something sweet, maybe pie. The low murmur of conversations happening at the same time from a dozen different directions. A song you recognize from somewhere, drifting out of the jukebox in the corner. And behind the counter, a woman in a white uniform and a little paper hat glances up and says what diner waitresses have said for 100 years. Sit anywhere you like, hun. Welcome to the American diner. Not a restaurant exactly, not a cafe, something that belongs entirely to its own category. A category that America invented, perfected over several decades, and carried to its most glorious peak, somewhere in the 1950s, in 1,000 different towns, on 1,000 different corners, in 1,000 different buildings, that all somehow managed to feel like the same place. The place you went when you were hungry, yes, but also when you needed to feel like somebody, when you needed the counter stool and the coffee cup and the quiet nod of someone who recognized your face, when you needed, more than anything, to belong somewhere warm. Tonight, we're going in. The outside of the diner announces itself before you even reach the door. The neon sign goes up maybe 30 feet in the air, buzzing softly in the dark, spelling out a name in cursive script, or sometimes just a single word. Eat. That's all. One syllable, blazing red or pink or blue-white in the night sky. And somehow that's enough. It's more than enough. You can see it from a quarter mile down the road, and it's been drawing people in since the moment it was switched on. The building itself is something to look at in daylight, too. Many of the great diners of the 1950s were built in a streamlined style. Stainless steel paneling on the outside, curved corners, big plate glass windows running the length of the front wall. Some of them were specifically designed to look like railroad dining cars, and they arrived on flatbed trucks and were set into place on their lots exactly that way. Entire buildings delivered and installed like furniture. Others grew organically from older structures, added onto and modified over the years until they were completely themselves. But all of them shared something. They were built to be noticed. They were built to say, this is a place where things happen, where coffee is hot, where the griddle never really goes cold. Push through that door. Step inside onto the checkered floor. Black and white tile, laid in a pattern that seems almost impossibly cheerful for a surface people walk on. It squares itself off in every direction and pulls the eye toward the counter, which is where the real heart of any diner lives. The counter runs the length of the building, a long, graceful curve of formica and stainless steel, and in front of it sit the stools. Chrome stems, cushioned seats upholstered in red vinyl, or sometimes turquoise, and every single one of them spins. If you're under the age of 12, spinning on a diner stool is one of the great physical pleasures available to you. The waitress knows this. She doesn't say anything. She saw the same thing in the kid who sat there yesterday. The smell hits you differently once you're inside. From the street, it was just a general suggestion of good things. In here, it separates itself into layers. The deep char of the griddle, the sharp cut of fresh coffee, the sweetness of pie warming in a glass case near the register, the faint, salty undertone of bacon grease that has soaked into the walls over years and years of early mornings. No air freshener, no scented candle, no managed atmosphere. Just the accumulated smell of 10,000 breakfasts and 10,000 cups of coffee, all of it saying the same thing. This is a working kitchen. Real food gets made here. Find yourself a seat. There are booths along the wall, deep, generous booths, upholstered in the same red vinyl as the counter stools. The seats worn just slightly at the corners where 1,000 elbows have rested. The tabletops are formica, usually in white or speckled gray, and the edges are trimmed with chrome. On the table, a chrome napkin dispenser, a pair of chrome salt and pepper shakers, a small glass sugar dispenser, a bottle of ketchup, and, in many booths, a miniature jukebox selector mounted on the wall, a little flip-through card of song titles that connects to the big Wurlitzer or Seeburg over in the corner. Pick a song. It costs a nickel or sometimes a dime, and that dime will play for the whole diner. The jukebox itself deserves a moment. By the early 1950s, jukeboxes had become so embedded in diner culture that their charts were being factored into the Billboard Hot 100. What people played in diners actually shaped what the country was listening to. The great jukeboxes of the era were architectural objects in their own right. Arched tops lit from within, bubbling tubes of colored light running along the sides, the records visible behind a curved panel of glass, waiting in their slots. You put in your coin. The arm swings over, the record drops, and suddenly, the whole diner has a soundtrack. By the mid-1950s, that soundtrack was often rock and roll. Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly. The sound that teenagers had claimed for their own, and that was driving everyone over 30 mildly insane. The diner was where you heard it first. The diner was where you argued about it with your friends over a milkshake, one straw or two, the glass sweating on the formica, while outside the sun went down and the neon came on, and nobody particularly wanted to leave. Because the diner was where teenagers lived in the 1950s. After school, after football practice, after the Saturday matinee, the diner was the gathering place. There was no mall. There was no food court with its acres of identical chain restaurants. There was the diner on the corner and the booth in the back that your group had claimed as yours through sheer regularity, and the waitress who knew your name and knew what you were going to order before you opened your menu, and knew better than to rush you out. Let's talk about that waitress for a moment, because she was as much a part of the diner as the chrome and the tile. The great diner waitresses of the 1950s were professionals in the truest sense of the word. Women who had been doing this job for years, who could carry 4 plates on one arm while taking an order with the other hand without writing a single thing down, who knew the difference between a customer who needed more coffee and a customer who needed to be left alone, and who could tell that difference from across the room. They wore white uniforms with small collars, sometimes a little apron, and a paper or starched cap pinned into their hair, and they moved through the diner the way good athletes move through their sport, efficiently, fluidly, always exactly where they needed to be. And they talked to the kitchen in their own language. Diner lingo had been developing since the early 1900s, and by the 1950s, it was a full-blown oral tradition, a private vocabulary that ran between the waitress and the short-order cook like a secret code. Adam and Eve on a raft meant 2 poached eggs on toast. Wreck 'em meant scramble them. Burn one meant a well-done hamburger. Burn the British, a phrase that had been shouted across diner counters since before most of the customers were born, meant a toasted English muffin. Sunny side up and over easy, which we still use today without thinking about it, were originally diner lingo. They started behind a counter somewhere in the 1920s and never left. The short order cook who received these calls was a specialist of a particular and underappreciated kind. In a busy diner during the breakfast rush, a short order cook might be managing a dozen different orders simultaneously. Eggs 3 different ways, pancakes, hash, toast, bacon, and sausage, all on a flat-top griddle the size of a dining table, with tickets coming in faster than they went out. The good ones made it look almost calm. They had a system, they had a rhythm, and the rhythm was something to watch. Now, let's talk about the menu. In the 1950s, you could sit down at a diner counter and eat a full meal, a real, satisfying, made-on-the-premises meal, for somewhere between 35 and 75 cents if you ordered the Blue Plate Special. The Blue Plate Special was the diner's daily deal. One main course, a couple of sides, sometimes bread and butter, all served together on a single large plate at a price that a working person could afford without thinking twice. Roast beef with mashed potatoes and green beans. Pork chops with applesauce and carrots. Ham with sweet potatoes and biscuits. The exact composition changed daily, but the idea never did. A complete home-style meal for a price that left you with change from $1. A hamburger was 15 to 20 cents. A milkshake, chocolate, vanilla, or strawberry, made in a steel cup on a mechanical mixer and poured out thick and cold into a tall glass, ran about 20 cents. Coffee was a dime. And the rule in most diners was that it stayed a dime as long as you were sitting down. And refills came without asking. Apple pie was maybe 15 cents a slice, sometimes 20 if you wanted ice cream alongside it. And the pie was almost certainly baked that morning by someone in the kitchen, not shipped in from a warehouse. A father could bring his family of 4 into a diner and feed everyone a real dinner for under $2. That arithmetic meant something. The diner wasn't just convenient. It was part of the social contract of a working America. A place where a meal out wasn't a special occasion, but a regular, ordinary, taken for granted part of the week. And there were the regulars. Every diner had them. The man who came in at 6:15 every weekday morning without fail, sat in the same stool, ordered the same thing without looking at the menu, and was out by 6:45 with the newspaper under his arm. The older woman who came for pie and coffee every Tuesday afternoon and stayed for 2 hours. The truck driver who stopped in every time his route brought him through town, who the waitress recognized the moment he pushed through the door, and whose coffee was already poured by the time he settled onto his stool. The diner kept track of people, not formally, not with any system, just in the way that any good diner waitress kept track, with memory and attention, and the particular warmth of professional care that the best of them brought to the job without ever calling attention to it. Many diners never closed. The sign said open 24 hours, and it meant it. The overnight shift was its own world, quieter, slower, stranger sometimes. The hour between 2 and 4, when the only customers might be a night watchman, a nurse heading home from a late shift, a couple who'd been driving since midnight and needed coffee before they could face the rest of the road. The coffee was the same, The pie was the same. The stool spun the same way. The diner didn't make distinctions about what time it was or what kind of person you were. You came in. You were fed. You belonged there for as long as you needed to. That was the thing about the diner. It asked very little of you. You didn't need to dress up. You didn't need a reservation. You didn't need to know anyone or be anyone. You needed a few cents and a reason to come through the door. And the reason didn't even have to be hunger. The reason could just be that the lights were on and the night was cold and you wanted to sit somewhere warm for a while. America doesn't really have that anymore. Not in the same way. The diners that survive, and some of them do, in New Jersey and upstate New York, and small towns across the country that held on, are often beloved precisely because they feel like the last outpost of something that used to be everywhere. There is a quality to sitting at a real diner counter, the stool turning a little under you, the coffee arriving without being asked for, the sound of the griddle behind the pass, that you simply cannot manufacture in a chain restaurant, no matter how many vintage signs you put on the wall. The checkered floor doesn't care how you feel. The neon sign doesn't care what you're going through. But somehow, in some way, that's hard to put into words. Both of them help. You know this. Or you did once. If you sat on those stools, if you leaned your elbows on that Formica counter, if you heard your own name called by a woman who remembered it without being asked, you know exactly what we're talking about. Do you have a diner you remember? A particular stool? A particular booth? A particular piece of pie? A waitress whose name you still know? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to sit down and hear about it. And if this took you somewhere tonight, somewhere warm, somewhere with chrome and checkered floors, and coffee that never ran out, please send it to someone who'd want to go back there too. We'll see you next time, right here on Memory Lane.